The hammer blow echoed across the valley like a heartbeat, the only sound of hope left in Blackwood Creek after the storm of the century. Kate and Martha Vance, both in their 70s, were out in the mud, trying to rebuild the only home they'd ever known with their bare, bleeding hands. But then, the ground shook. Not from thunder, but from the hooves of 50 cattlemen. Silas Thorne, the richest, most ruthless rancher in Wyoming, rode up to the wreckage. He didn't offer a blanket. He didn't offer a helping hand. He looked down from his black stallion at the shivering old couple and gave a command that froze the town. All stop now. Everyone thought it was an act of cruelty, but what happened in the next 10 minutes would reveal a 40-year-old secret, a stolen fortune, and a twist that no one, not even the sheriff, saw coming. This is the story of the storm, the rancher, and the truth buried in the mud. The storm that tore through Blackwood Creek, Wyoming, in the autumn of 1887 wasn't just a weather event. It was a judgment. That's what the preacher, Father Caldwell, had said in the town square, while the sky turned that bruised, sickly shade of green. But for Kate Vance, judgment or not, the wind didn't distinguish between the sinners and the saints. It took the roof off the saloon, it flattened the blacksmith's shed, and it absolutely decimated the small timber cabin that he and his wife, Martha, had called home for 52 years. 2 days after the winds died down, the silence was heavier than the storm. The air still smelled of ozone, wet pine, and the coppery tang of mud. The valley, usually a vibrant tapestry of golden wheat and sagebrush, was now a scar of churned earth and splintered wood. Kate Vance wiped sweat from his brow with a forearm that was more bone and tendon than muscle these days. At 74, his hands were gnarled like old oak roots, twisted by decades of arthritis and hard labor. He gripped the handle of a rusted hammer, his breath coming in shallow, wheezing rattles. "Kate, you rest now," Martha called out. She was dragging a pine plank from a pile of debris, her gingham dress stained brown with muck up to the knees. Her silver hair, usually pinned up in a neat bun, was loose and wild, framing a face etched with exhaustion. "That heart of yours can't take this pace." "My heart stops when this house is standing again, Martha, and not a moment before," Kate grunted, forcing a nail into a salvaged beam. They were alone. The neighbors had their own ruins to tend to, and the town of Blackwood Creek was 3 miles down the flooded dirt road. They had lost the barn. They had lost the chickens. The winter wheat crop was flattened into the mud. All they had was the frame of the house, stripped bare like a skeleton, and their stubborn refusal to leave. They worked in a rhythm born of half a century of marriage. Kate hammered, Martha hauled. They didn't speak much. They didn't have to. They knew the stakes. Winter was coming early this year. The frost was already biting the tips of the grass in the mornings. If they didn't have 4 walls and a roof by the first snow, they would freeze. It was that simple. By noon, a low rumble began to vibrate through the soles of Kate's boots. He paused, the hammer raised in midair. He looked toward the ridgeline to the east. At first, it looked like a dark cloud spilling over the hill, but the rhythm was wrong. It was too rhythmic, too heavy. "Riders," Kate said, his voice dropping an octave. Martha stopped, clutching the plank to her chest like a shield. "Who is it? The sheriff?" Kate squinted. "Too many horses for the sheriff." The cloud resolved into shapes. Men on horseback, men in long oilskin dusters, and at the front, riding a massive black stallion that looked like a shadow cut from the night itself, was Silas Thorne. The temperature in the clearing seemed to drop 10 degrees. Silas Thorne owned the Triple Bar Ranch, an empire that spanned 40,000 acres. He owned the bank in town. he owned the grain mill. Some whispered he owned the judge in the county seat too. He was a man of sharp angles and cold eyes, a man who had expanded his territory not by shaking hands, but by foreclosing on them. There were 12 men with him. They fanned out in a semicircle around the wreckage of the Vance homestead, blocking out the weak afternoon sun. The horses snorted, their breath pluming in the chill air. Kate lowered his hammer slowly, but he didn't drop it. He stepped in front of Martha. "Mr. Thorne," Kate said, "we got nothing for you to take today. Storm beat you to it." Silas Thorne didn't speak immediately. He sat high in his saddle, his gloved hands resting casually on the pommel. He wore a pristine black Stetson, unmarred by the storm, and a charcoal suit that looked out of place amongst the mud and misery. He looked at the half-raised wall. He looked at the pile of wet debris. Finally, his gaze landed on Martha, lingering there for a beat too long before shifting to Kate. "You're building," Thorne said. His voice was smooth, deep, and devoid of warmth. It sounded like gravel sliding down a chute. "We're rebuilding," Kate corrected, his chin lifting. "Winter's coming." "That it is," Thorne said. He pulled a gold pocket watch from his vest, checked it, and snapped it shut. "That it is." One of Thorne's men, a scarred enforcer named Kincaid, spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the clean wood Martha had just stacked. "Looks like kindling to me, boss." Thorne raised a hand, silencing Kincaid. He rode his horse a few steps closer until the beast was looming over Kate. The smell of expensive leather and tobacco smoke wafted down. "You're wasting your energy, Kate," Thorne said softly. "It's my energy to waste," Kate retorted. "Now, unless you came to grab a hammer, get off my land. We have work to do." Thorne's eyes narrowed. The air grew tight, like a bowstring pulled to its limit. He leaned forward, the saddle leather creaking. "That's just it," Thorne said. "I didn't come to help, and I didn't come to watch." Thorne straightened up, his voice projecting so that every one of his hired guns, and the trembling Martha, could hear him clearly. "All stop now." The command rang out across the clearing. Kate blinked, confused. "What did you say?" "I said, all stop now," Thorne repeated, his voice harder this time, like iron striking flint. "Put the hammer down, Kate. Drop the wood, Martha. No more nails, no more boards. You are done." Kate tightened his grip on the hammer. His knuckles turned white. "You don't give orders here, Silas. This is Vance land. Has been since the Treaty of 48. Is it?" Thorne reached into his inner coat pocket. The movement caused 3 of his men to rest their hands on their revolver butts. Kate didn't flinch. He was old, but he had fought in the Indian Wars. He knew the look of a man about to draw, and Thorne wasn't drawing a gun. Thorne pulled out a folded document. It was thick, official parchment, sealed with red wax that looked like a drop of fresh blood. "You're a proud man, Kate. Too proud to check the mail in town, apparently," Thorne said. "The storm destroyed a lot of things. It destroyed the bridge. It destroyed the telegraph lines. But it didn't destroy the debt ledger at the First National Bank of Cheyenne." Martha let out a small gasp. "The loan. Kate, we paid the installment." "We did," Kate said, looking back at her. "I sent the money with Miller last month." Thorne shook his head slowly, a mock expression of pity on his face. "Miller never made it to Cheyenne, Kate. Miller took your money and bought a ticket to San Francisco. You're 3 months behind. And in the fine print of the mortgage you signed 10 years ago, 90 days delinquent means immediate foreclosure." Thorne tossed the paper. It fluttered down, landing in the mud between Kate's boots. "I bought the note this morning," Thorne said. "This isn't your land anymore. It's mine, and I don't want you building a shack on my property." Kate stared at the paper. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The house, the land, the memories of their children, now grown and gone, or buried in the small plot out back. All of it. Gone with a piece of paper? "You can't do this," Martha cried out, stepping forward. "It's winter. Where will we go?" Thorne looked at her, his face impassive. "That is not my concern, Mrs. Vance. My concern is clearing this debris. Boys," he gestured to his men, "tear it down." For a moment, nobody moved. The brutality of the order hung in the air. To tear down a half-built shelter over the heads of two elderly people in the wake of a storm was a level of malice that even Thorne's hardened cattlemen hesitated to execute. "Did I stutter?" Thorne's voice lashed out like a whip. "Tear it down!" Kincaid, the man with the scar, grinned. He had been waiting for this. He spurred his horse forward, swinging a heavy lasso. He looped it around the main support beam Kate had just nailed in place. "No!" Kate roared. The old man moved with a speed that defied his age. He dropped the hammer and lunged for the shotgun, leaning against a stump 5 yards away. "Don't do it, old man!" one of the riders shouted. Kate grabbed the cold steel of the double-barrel shotgun. He spun around, bringing the stock to his shoulder. But he was 74, and his hands shook. Bang! A shot rang out, but it didn't come from Kate. Dirt sprayed up inches from Kate's boot. A smoking hole in the mud marked the warning shot. Silas Thorne held a pearl-handled Colt Peacemaker, smoke drifting lazily from the barrel. He hadn't even looked like he was aiming. "Drop it, Kate," Thorne said, his voice deadly calm. "I have 12 men here. You have 2 shells. You might get me, but Martha won't survive the next 5 seconds." Kate froze. The reality of the situation crashed down on him. He looked at Martha. She was trembling, her hands over her mouth, eyes wide with terror. He couldn't risk her, not for wood and dirt. Slowly, agonizingly, Kate lowered the shotgun. He let it fall into the mud. "Smart," Thorne said, holstering his weapon. He nodded to Kincaid. "Proceed." Kincaid dallied the rope around his saddle horn and spurred his horse. The rope went taut. The fresh nails shrieked as they were ripped from the wood. With a sickening crunch, the wall Kate had spent the last 6 hours building collapsed into a heap of splinters. Martha sobbed aloud, a sound of pure heartbreak. "Why?" Kate whispered, his voice broken. "Why are you doing this, Silas? You have everything. You have the valley. You have the money. Why do you need this patch of rocks?" Thorne watched the wall fall with a strange intensity. He didn't look triumphant. He looked focused. "Because, Kate," Thorne said, "sometimes you have to clear the rot to build something strong. You've been sitting on this land for 40 years, scratching out a living, wasting its potential." "Potential?" Kate spat. "It's a home." "It's a resource," Thorne corrected, "and you're in the way." Just then, the sound of a buggy approaching drew everyone's attention. Careening down the muddy track was a black carriage, with the gold star of the sheriff's office painted on the side. Sheriff Brody jumped out before the buggy even fully stopped. He was a portly man, his uniform straining at the buttons, his face red with exertion. "Hold it! Hold it right there!" Brody shouted, wading through the mud. Kate felt a surge of relief. "Sheriff, thank God! Tell him, Brody! Tell him he can't do this!" Sheriff Brody looked at the collapsed wall, then at Kate, and finally, nervously, up at Silas Thorne. Brody took off his hat and wiped his forehead. "Mr. Thorne," Brody said, his voice shaking slightly. I heard you were coming out here." "I assume you're here to enforce the eviction, Sheriff?" Thorne asked, arching an eyebrow. Brody swallowed hard. He looked at Kate, his eyes filled with apology. "Kate, I saw the papers at the bank this morning. Thorne's got the deed. It's all legal, like." "Legal!" Kate shouted. He bought the debt behind my back. Miller stole my payment." "That's a matter for the courts, Kate," Brodie mumbled. "But right now, the land belongs to Mr. Thorne, and he has the right to clear it." Kate felt his knees give way. Even the law was against them. It was over. Thorne signalled his men to stop. The destruction paused. "I'm not a monster, despite what you think," Thorne said, looking down at the defeated couple. "I'm not sending you out to die in the cold." Thorne reached into his pocket again and pulled out a small leather pouch. He tossed it to Brodie. It clinked heavily. Gold. "There's $500 in there," Thorne said. "That's enough to buy a ticket east, back to where you came from, and set up a small apartment in St. Louis. Maybe Chicago. Somewhere civilized. Somewhere you don't have to fight the wind." "We don't want your charity," Martha said, finding her voice. It was quiet, but steel hard. "And we don't want to go to Chicago. Our children are buried here. Our life is here." "Your life was here," Thorne said coldly. "Now it's just mud." Thorne turned his horse around. "You have until sundown to gather your personal effects. Anything left on the property after the sun touches that ridge burns." "Burns?" Sheriff Brodie exclaimed. "Mr. Thorne, surely—" "It all burns," Thorne said. "The wood is rot. The ground needs to be purified." He looked back at Kate one last time. For a split second, Kate thought he saw something flicker in the tycoon's eyes. Not hatred, but something closer to desperation. "Don't fight me on this, Kate," Thorne said, his voice dropping so low only the old man could hear. "Just take the money and go. Run as far as you can." "Or what?" Kate challenged. "Or you'll find out what really happened during the storm," Thorne said cryptically. With a whistle, Thorne kicked his stallion into a gallop, his men trailing behind him like a pack of wolves, leaving Kate and Martha standing in the ruin of their life, with $500 in blood money and the sun already sinking toward the horizon. As the dust settled, Kate looked at the pouch in the sheriff's hand. Then he looked at the crumbled wall. He walked over to the mud, reached down, and picked up his hammer. "Kate?" Martha asked, her voice trembling. "What are you doing? He said he'd burn it." Kate wiped the mud off the hammer handle. His eyes were no longer tired. They were burning with a cold, hard fury. "He said to stop building," Kate said. "He didn't say anything about digging." "Digging?" "Thorne is hiding something," Kate said, looking at the tracks the black stallion had left. "He didn't come here for the land, Martha. He barely looked at the view. He kept looking at the foundation. He kept looking at the cellar door." Kate walked over to the storm cellar, the only part of the house the tornado hadn't touched. It was padlocked, covered in debris. "Get the shovel, Martha," Kate said. "We aren't going to Chicago. We're going to find out what Silas Thorne is so afraid of." The sun began its descent, painting the sky in violent shades of bruised purple and blood orange. To anyone else, it was a beautiful sunset over the Wyoming plains. To Kate and Martha Vance, it was a countdown clock. They were down in the storm cellar. It was a cramped, damp space, smelling of wet earth and old potatoes. The storm had flooded the bottom 3 inches, creating a cold slurry of mud that sucked at their boots. "Kate, this is madness," Martha whispered, holding a flickering kerosene lantern high. Her arms trembled from the weight, casting dancing shadows against the rough-hewn stone walls. "Thorne said he'd burn the place at sundown. That's less than an hour away. We should be packing the wagon." Kate was on his knees in the mud, ignoring the pain in his arthritic joints. He was tapping the stone floor with the handle of the shovel. Thud, thud, thud. "He wasn't looking at the house, Martha," Kate muttered, more to himself than her. "When Thorne rode up, he didn't look at the roof the wind took. He didn't look at the barn. His eyes went right here, to the cellar doors." Maybe he just wanted to see if we drowned, Martha said, her voice thick with worry. No. Kate stopped tapping. He looked up, his eyes gleaming in the lantern light. He was checking if the storm had exposed it. Exposed what? The secret, Kate said. The reason he bought a debt he had no business buying. Kate crawled to the back corner of the cellar, near where the shelves of pickled beets used to stand before the earthquake-like tremors of the tornado knocked them down. The wall here was made of river stones, mortared with a mixture of clay and lime, but near the base the mortar had cracked significantly during the storm. Kate jammed the tip of the shovel into the crack. "Hold the light steady," he commanded. He leaned his weight into the shovel. He groaned, the veins in his neck bulging. The old man summoned strength he hadn't used since he cleared this land of stumps 40 years ago. Crack. A large river stone popped loose, rolling into the mud with a wet splash. Behind it wasn't dirt, it was darkness. "A hollow?" Martha gasped, stepping closer. Kate pulled out 2 more stones. The storm hadn't just shaken the house, it had shifted the foundation enough to reveal a cavity that had been expertly hidden behind a false wall. Kate reached into the hole. He felt something cold. Something metal. He grasped a rusted iron handle and pulled. It wouldn't budge. "Help me!" he grunted. Martha set the lantern on a dry shelf and grabbed the other side of the handle. Together, the old couple pulled. The friction of metal on stone shrieked like a dying animal, loud enough that they froze, terrified that Thorne's men might be listening from the ridge. Silence followed. They pulled again. With a sudden lurch, a heavy iron lockbox, about the size of a small trunk, slid out of the wall and thudded into the mud. It was ancient. The iron was pitted with rust, but the lock was made of brass and had held up against the damp. "What is it?" Martha whispered. "I don't know," Kate said. He grabbed his hammer from his belt loop. "But Silas Thorne seems willing to kill for it." Kate didn't bother with lock-picking. He swung the hammer, striking the rusted hasp with a deafening clang. Once, twice. On the third strike, the corroded metal snapped. Kate threw the lid back. They both stared. They expected gold. Everyone in the West expected gold, but the box wasn't filled with coins. It was filled with oilskin packets, wrapped tight to keep out the moisture. Kate picked up the top packet and unwrapped it with shaking fingers. Inside was a leather-bound journal and a stack of legal documents. The paper was yellowed and brittle. He opened the journal. The handwriting was jagged, aggressive. May 12, 1847. The shipment is secure. The Union paymaster is dead. I have buried the payroll on the plot by the creek. The heat is too high to move it now. I will return when the war settles. Kate turned the page to the signature. Jeremiah Thorne. Martha gasped. Silas's father, the war hero. Hero? Kate scoffed, reading further. Listen to this. If I am to build an empire, I cannot do it on a soldier's wage. This gold will be the seed of the Thorne dynasty, but I must hide it well. The Vance family is moving on to the land above. Let them farm. Let them toil. They are the perfect watchdogs. I will buy them out when the time is right. Kate looked up, his face pale. We weren't just farmers, Martha. We were guards, unwitting guards for a stolen Union payroll. He dug deeper into the box. Beneath the journal, wrapped in heavy canvas, were bars. Not gold bars, but silver. Heavy, stamped bars from the U.S. Treasury. This is it, Kate said, his voice trembling. This is the fortune everyone said disappeared during the Mexican-American War. Silas must have found his father's old journals, realized the location, and waited. But why now? Martha asked. Why wait 40 years? Because the storm, Kate realized. He didn't know exactly where it was. He knew it was on the land, But he couldn't just dig up our house while we lived here. But when the storm hit, he saw his chance. He could evict us, tear down the ruins under the guise of clearing debris, and dig up the legacy. "Kate," Martha said, her voice rising in panic. "If this is stolen government silver, and Silas knows we found it, he won't just evict us," Kate finished the thought, his eyes hardening. "He'll bury us in this hole." Suddenly, the sound of hoofbeats thundered above their heads. The ground shook, dust filtering down from the cellar ceiling. "He's back," Martha whispered. "And it's not sundown yet," Kate said, snapping the box shut. "He's early." Above ground, the scene was apocalyptic. Silas Thorne had returned, and this time he hadn't brought a demolition crew. He had brought a war party. 20 men sat on horseback, encircling the homestead. They held torches that sputtered and hissed in the evening breeze, casting long, dancing shadows across the mud. Thorne sat on his black stallion, his face illuminated by the flickering firelight. He looked like a demon king surveying his domain. "Kate!" Thorne shouted. His voice was no longer smooth. It was ragged with impatience. "I know you're down there." Kincaid saw the lantern light through the cellar cracks. Inside the cellar, Kate blew out the lantern instantly, plunging them into darkness. "Stay quiet," Kate hissed to Martha. He moved to the small ventilation slit near the top of the cellar wall, peering out. He could see the legs of the horses. He could smell the kerosene from the torches. "You're a stubborn man, Kate," Thorne yelled. "I gave you a way out. $500, a fresh start, but you had to dig. You just had to dig." Thorne signaled to Kincaid. "Light the perimeter." Kincaid and 2 others rode in a circle around the wreckage of the house, dropping their torches into the piles of dry brush and shattered timber that the storm had scattered. The wood, though damp on the surface, had dried out enough in the wind to catch. Whoosh! A ring of fire erupted around the foundation. The heat was instantaneous, sucking the oxygen out of the air. "Smoked out like badgers," Kincaid laughed. "Mr. Thorne." Sheriff Brody's buggy appeared again on the ridge, but he didn't come down this time. He stayed up on the high road, watching. He was too cowardly to stop it, too complicit to intervene. The law had abandoned Blackwood Creek. "Kate!" Thorne roared over the crackling flames. "Throw out the box. Throw out my father's legacy, and I might let you walk through the flames." In the cellar, the temperature was rising. Smoke began to curl in through the cracks in the floorboards above. "We're going to die here," Martha coughed, clutching Kate's arm. "Give it to him, Kate. It's not worth our lives." Kate looked at the heavy iron box. Then he looked at the journal. He thought about the 50 years of back-breaking labor, the years of poverty while they sat on top of a fortune stolen by the very family that kept them poor. "No," Kate said. "He won't let us live, Martha. We know the truth now. If we walk out there empty-handed, we're dead witnesses. If we walk out there with the box, we're dead thieves. We need leverage." Kate grabbed the journal and the legal documents. He shoved them inside his shirt, against his chest. "Martha, listen to me," Kate said, gripping her shoulders. "The storm cellar has a drainage pipe. It runs out to the creek bed. It's tight, but you can fit." "I'm not leaving you." "You have to," Kate said fiercely. "I'm going to open the doors. I'm going to draw their fire. You crawl down that pipe. You run to the telegraph office in the next town over. In Oak Haven, not here. You wire the U.S. Marshal in Cheyenne. Tell him we found the 1847 payroll." "Kate, no, go!" Kate shoved her toward the back of the cellar, where a rusted grate covered the drainage hole. He waited until she had pried the grate loose and shimmied her small frame into the dark, wet tunnel. Only when he heard the scraping of her boots fade did he turn back to the cellar doors. He picked up the shotgun. He had retrieved it from the mud earlier. He had 2 shells. 2 shells against 20 men. He looked at the iron box. He couldn't lift it, but he could use it. Kate climbed the short wooden stairs to the storm doors. The wood was hot to the touch. The fire was right on top of them now. With a primal scream, Kate kicked the doors open. Bang! The doors flew back, banging against the earth. Smoke billowed out, blinding the riders. "There he is!" Kincaid shouted. "Cut him down!" "Hold fire!" Thorne screamed. "He might have the papers." Kate emerged from the smoke, coughing, his eyes watering. He didn't look like a victim. He looked like a spectre of vengeance, covered in mud and soot, the shotgun leveled at Silas Thorne's chest. "Back off," Kate croaked, "or I send you to hell before the devil is ready for you." The horses reared, spooked by the smoke and the sudden appearance of the old man. Thorne held his hand up, halting his men. He smiled, a cruel, twisted thing. "You don't have the nerve, old man," Thorne said. "Where is the box?" "It's down there," Kate said, nodding to the inferno behind him. "Burning. Just like you wanted." Thorne's face went white. "You lie." "Paper burns, Silas," Kate shouted. "Your father's confession. Gone. The deed? Gone. All that's left is the silver, and it's going to melt into a puddle of slag before you can touch it." It was a bluff. The box was fireproof iron. The papers were in his shirt, but Thorne didn't know that. Panic flickered in Thorne's eyes. For the first time, the billionaire rancher looked vulnerable. He had spent his life building a reputation on power and lineage. If the proof of his father's crimes and the illegitimacy of his fortune was destroyed, he was safe. But if the silver melted, he lost the liquidity he desperately needed. "Put the fire out!" Thorne screamed at his men. "Put it out now!" "Boss, we can't!" Kincaid yelled. "It's too hot!" "I said put it out!" Thorne jumped off his horse, manic desperation taking over. He took off his expensive duster and started beating at the flames near the cellar door. Kate watched them scramble. Chaos ensued. The disciplined line of riders broke as they tried to obey their boss's impossible command. This was his chance. Kate didn't shoot. He turned and ran. Not toward the road, but toward the dense thicket of thorns and debris near the creek, the opposite direction of where Martha had gone. "He's running!" Kincaid shouted. "Forget the fire! Get him!" Thorne shrieked, his face smeared with soot. "He has the key, or he knows what was in it. Don't let him leave this valley alive!" Kate crashed into the underbrush. The thorns tore at his clothes and skin, but he didn't feel it. He was 74 years old. His heart was hammering like a trapped bird, and 20 killers were on his heels. He had to buy Martha time. A shot rang out. A bullet whizzed past Kate's ear, embedding itself in a tree trunk. Kate scrambled down a muddy embankment, sliding into the rushing water of Blackwood Creek. The cold water shocked his system. He waded downstream, using the overhanging willows for cover. Above him, on the bank, the horses thundered. "Spread out!" Thorne's voice echoed. "Flush him out! $5,000 to the man who brings me his head!" Kate pressed his back against the muddy bank, submerged up to his chin in the freezing water, clutching the shotgun to his chest. He watched the torchlights flicker through the trees above him. He was hunted. He was alone. But inside his shirt, he could feel the crinkle of the paper. The truth. And as long as he had the truth, Silas Thorne was just a man with a lot of money and a rope around his neck waiting to be pulled. The moon was hidden behind a thick blanket of storm clouds, leaving the creek bed in near total darkness. This was Kate Vance's only advantage. He was 74 years old. His knees felt like they were filled with broken glass, and his chest burned with every ragged breath. But Kate had something Silas Thorne's hired guns didn't have. He knew the shape of the land in the dark. He knew where the creek bed dropped off into deep pools. He knew where the clay turned into quicksand like muck. He knew where the tangled roots of the ancient cottonwoods created natural snares. Kate wasn't running anymore. He couldn't outrun horses. He was hunting. Up on the bank, the torches bobbed like angry fireflies. "I see tracks!" a voice shouted. It was Kincaid. "He went into the willows!" Kate pressed himself into the hollow of a rotted stump, the icy mud coating his skin, masking his scent and his silhouette. He reached into his shirt, pulled out the oilskin packet containing the journal and the deed, and shoved it deep into the hollow root system of the stump. He covered it with a handful of wet leaves. If they caught him, they wouldn't find the proof on his body. The secret would stay buried until Martha brought the law. Crack. A horse stepped close, its hoof sinking into the mud just 3 feet from Kate's face. The rider swung his torch low. "Come out, old man," the rider sneered. "Thorne said he might let you live if you give up the paper." Kate didn't move. He barely breathed. He waited until the horse shifted its weight, uneasy in the soft footing. Then Kate moved with the sudden, violent energy of a coiled snake. He didn't attack the man. He attacked the horse. Kate drove the butt of his shotgun into the soft flank of the gelding. The horse squealed, bucking violently in the slippery mud. The rider, caught off guard, was thrown from the saddle, splashing face first into the creek. The torch hissed and went out in the water. Darkness reclaimed the spot. "Help, my leg!" the rider screamed, thrashing in the water. "Over here!" Kincaid shouted from the ridge. "Get him!" Gunshots erupted, blindly tearing through the willow branches. Kate scrambled on his belly, army crawling through the mud, moving away from the chaos he had caused. He was channeling the soldier he had been 50 years ago, the young private who had survived the ambush at Buena Vista. But age was a cruel reality. As he pulled himself up a muddy incline, his bad shoulder gave out. He slipped, sliding back down with a loud splash. "Gotcha!" a voice growled. A lasso whipped out of the darkness. The heavy rope loop settled over Kate's shoulders and tightened instantly, pinning his arms to his sides. Kate gasped as he was jerked off his feet. He was dragged through the mud, water filling his mouth, up the jagged bank. "I got him, boss! I reeled him in!" Kate was hauled up onto the grassy ridge, coughing and sputtering. A boot kicked him in the ribs, flipping him over onto his back. He looked up into the barrel of a Colt Peacemaker. Silas Thorne loomed over him, backlit by the distant fire of the burning homestead. Thorne looked unhinged. His expensive suit was torn, his hat was gone, and his eyes were wide with a frantic, drug-like intensity. "Where is it?" Thorne hissed, pressing the gun barrel against Kate's forehead. The metal was hot. Kate spat a mouthful of bloody mud onto Thorne's polished boot. "Where is what, Silas?" "Your dignity." Thorne signaled Kincaid. "Search him." Kincaid roughly patted Kate down, tearing open his shirt. Buttons flew into the grass. Kincaid checked the pockets, the boots, even the lining of his coat. "Nothing, boss," Kincaid said, baffled. "He's clean, just the shotgun shells and a pocket knife." Thorne froze. The color drained from his face. He grabbed Kate by the lapels and hauled him up to his knees. "The journal, Kate!" Thorne screamed, shaking the old man. "The papers! Where did you put them?" Kate smiled. It was a grim, bloody smile, missing a tooth that had been knocked loose in the capture. "It's gone, Silas," Kate rasped. "Maybe I threw it in the fire. Maybe I dropped it in the creek. Maybe I mailed it to the governor." Thorne struck him across the face with the pistol. Kate's head snapped back, stars exploding in his vision. "You didn't burn it," Thorne panted. "You know what it's worth. You hid it." Thorne looked at the eastern horizon. A faint, grey line was beginning to form. Dawn was coming. The cover of night was fading, and with it, Thorne's window of opportunity to erase this problem quietly. "Tie him to the wagon wheel," Thorne commanded, his voice turning cold and mechanical. We're going to play a game. It's called How Much Does an Old Man Bleed Before He Remembers Where He Left His Memory? Kincaid hesitated. Boss, the sun's coming up. Maybe we should just— Do it! Thorne shrieked. I need those papers. If that journal gets out, the bank seizes everything. The triple bar, the accounts, the railroad shares, it's all leveraged against the assets in that cellar. I lose it all. The truth came out. It wasn't just about the silver. It was about the lie. Silas Thorne was broke. His empire was a hollow shell built on debt, held together by the promise of a secret fortune he had never been able to access, until the storm. Kate was dragged to the supply wagon. His hands were bound with rawhide to the heavy wooden spokes of the wheel. He slumped there, battered and shivering, watching the sun begin to rise over the ruin of his home. He had bought time. But had he bought enough? 7 miles away, on the outskirts of Oak Haven, a figure stumbled onto the main road. Martha Vance looked like a wraith. Her dress was shredded, her skin was grey with cold, and her feet were bleeding through her worn boots. She had walked through the night, navigating by the stars, driven by a terror that transcended exhaustion. The town of Oak Haven was waking up. A baker was opening his shutters. A milk wagon rattled down the cobblestones. They stopped and stared as the old woman limped down the center of the street. She didn't look at them. She had one destination, the Western Union Telegraph Office. She reached the door and rattled the handle. Locked. It didn't open until 8 a.m. It was barely 6 hours. No, she whimpered. She pounded on the glass with her fist. Open! Please, open the door! She picked up a loose brick from the sidewalk. She didn't care about the law anymore. She smashed the glass pane of the door, reached in, and turned the lock. She stumbled inside, collapsing against the counter. The noise woke the operator, a young man named Caleb, who slept in the back room. He came rushing out in his long johns, holding a candle. What in God's name? Caleb stopped when he saw her. Mrs. Vance, is that you? I heard about the storm over in Blackwood, but— Wire, Martha gasped, slapping a crumpled, wet dollar bill onto the counter. It was the emergency money she kept in her corset. Cheyenne, U.S. Marshal's office. Urgent. Mrs. Vance, you're bleeding. Let me get the doctor. Send the wire, Martha screamed, her voice cracking with a ferocity that made the young man jump. Write this down. Silas Thorne murdered Union Paymaster, 1847. Payroll located Vance Homestead. Thorne holding husband hostage. Send help. Send cavalry. Caleb's eyes went wide. Thorne. Silas Thorne. Mrs. Vance, you can't accuse the richest man in the county of— Do it, Caleb, she pleaded, grabbing his wrist with an iron grip. He's killing Kate right now. If you don't send that wire, his blood is on your hands. Caleb looked at the desperate woman. He looked at the blood on the floor. He saw the truth in her eyes. He ran to the machine. Click, clack, click, click. The sound of the telegraph key was the sweetest music Martha had ever heard. Click, clack. It's sent, Caleb said. But Mrs. Vance, even if they ride hard, Cheyenne is hours away. Martha sank to the floor, her energy finally spent. Then pray, Caleb. Pray for a miracle. Back at the Vance homestead, the miracle seemed far away. Kate hung from the wagon wheel, barely conscious. Thorne stood in front of him, holding a lit branding iron, one usually used for cattle. The glowing orange triple bar symbol radiated heat against Kate's face. Last chance, Kate, Thorne said softly. The pain stops when you talk. Go to hell, Kate whispered. Thorne sighed. Have it your way. He raised the iron. Suddenly, a sound cut through the morning air. It wasn't a bugle. It wasn't a siren. It was the whistle of a train. Thorne paused. The 7:15 to Denver. So what? But the whistle didn't stop. It blasted long and hard, again and again. And then came the screech of metal on metal, brakes locking up. The railroad tracks ran along the ridge about half a mile from the homestead. The train never stopped in Blackwood Creek. There was no station. "Why is the train stopping?" Kincaid asked, looking nervous. They watched as the massive steam engine ground to a halt on the embankment overlooking the valley. Steam billowed out. Then the doors of the cattle cars opened. Men didn't pour out, horses did. But these weren't ordinary horses. They were uniformed, blue coats, yellow kerchiefs, carbines. "Cavalry?" Kincaid shouted. "That's the U.S. cavalry." Thorne dropped the branding iron. "No, that's impossible. The army doesn't move that fast." But it wasn't the regular army. From the passenger car stepped a man in a black suit with a long white coat, flanked by 4 men with Winchester rifles and silver badges. The man in the suit raised a megaphone. "Silas Thorne!" The voice boomed across the valley. Thorne squinted. "Who is that?" The man walked to the edge of the ridge. Even from this distance, his posture was terrifyingly authoritative. "This is Judge Isaac Parker's office," the voice echoed. "We received a wire from Oakhaven. We were already on the train, hunting a fugitive, but it seems we found a bigger fish." It was a stroke of impossible luck. The hanging Judge Parker's deputies had been transiting through the territory on a separate manhunt when the telegraph came through the wire lines running parallel to the tracks. The station master had flagged the train down just 3 miles back. "Drop your weapons," the voice commanded, "or we will open fire with the Gatling." Thorne looked at the train. Sure enough, a side door slid open, revealing the brass barrels of a Gatling gun aimed directly at the clearing. Thorne's men didn't hesitate. Kincaid was the first to drop his gun belt. The others followed suit, raising their hands. They were hired guns, not soldiers. They weren't paid enough to fight the U.S. government. Thorne stood alone, the branding iron sizzling in the mud at his feet. He looked at Kate. He looked at the Gatling gun. "It's over, Silas," Kate rasped, lifting his head. "All stop now." Thorne's face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. He reached for his Colt. "No!" Kincaid yelled, diving for cover. Thorne drew. He didn't aim at the marshals. He aimed at Kate. If he was going down, he was taking the witness with him. Crack! A single shot rang out. It didn't come from the ridge. It came from the mud. Kate Vance, with his last ounce of strength, had kicked the branding iron up with his boot. It hit Thorne in the shin, causing him to stumble just as he pulled the trigger. The bullet flew wild, shattering a spoke of the wagon wheel next to Kate's head. Before Thorne could recover, a volley of rifle fire erupted from the ridge. Dirt kicked up all around Thorne. One bullet struck his shoulder, spinning him around. He fell into the mud, the same mud he had tried to steal. Silence returned to the valley. Kate let his head hang forward. He saw boots running toward him. He felt a knife cut the rawhide bindings. He fell forward, but strong arms caught him. "Easy, Mr. Vance," a deputy said. "We got you." Kate looked up. Through the blur of his vision, he didn't see the deputy. He saw a buggy racing down the hill. Martha. She was running before the buggy even stopped. She collided with him, burying her face in his dirty, bloodied shirt. "I told you," she sobbed. "I told you to rest." Kate held her, his shaking hand stroking her grey hair. He looked over her shoulder at Silas Thorne, who was being handcuffed and dragged away by the marshals. "I can rest now, Martha," Kate whispered. "The work is done." The trial of Silas Thorne didn't take place in the small courthouse of Blackwood Creek. It was moved to Cheyenne, under the jurisdiction of the federal courts, due to the sheer scale of the theft involved. The Thorne payroll, as the newspapers dubbed it, became the sensation of 1888. Kate and Martha Vance sat in the front row every day. Kate wore a new suit, bought not with charity, but with credit extended by a bank that was all too happy to distance itself from the disgraced Thorne empire. The evidence was damning. The journal Kate had hidden in the hollow tree stump was recovered by the marshals. It detailed not only the theft of the 1847 payroll by Silas's father, but also Silas's systematic fraud to cover it up. He had leveraged the stolen silver as collateral for loans he could never repay, essentially building a castle on a foundation of quicksand. When the gavel finally fell, Silas Thorne was sentenced to 20 years in the federal penitentiary at Leavenworth. As he was led away in chains, he looked back at the gallery. He didn't look at his lawyers. He looked at Kate. The hate was gone, replaced by a hollow, broken realization. He had possessed the valley, but he had never owned it. But the story didn't end in the courtroom. It ended back where it began, in the mud of Blackwood Creek. 3 months after the storm, spring had come to Wyoming. The wildflowers were pushing through the scars left by the tornado. Kate stood on the porch of the new house. It wasn't a mansion. It was a sturdy, 2-story timber home with a wraparound porch and a stone chimney that would outlast them both. They hadn't built it alone. After the news of the standoff broke, the town of Blackwood Creek had rallied. The people who had feared Thorne, the blacksmith, the miller, the other ranchers, realized that the shadow over the valley was gone. They came with wagons of lumber, bags of nails, and baskets of food. They raised the Vance barn in a single afternoon. Kate watched Martha in the garden. She was planting lilacs near the spot where the storm cellar used to be. The cellar had been filled in. The silver was gone, returned to the U.S. Treasury. But the government didn't leave them empty-handed. The finder's fee for recovering a lost Civil War-era payroll, adjusted for interest and the value of the bullion, was substantial. It was enough to buy new livestock, enough to fix the fences, enough to ensure that Kate and Martha would never have to worry about a winter freeze again. Sheriff Brody rode up the driveway. He looked different these days, lighter. He had resigned shortly after the arrest, unable to reconcile his cowardice with his badge. He was working as a mail carrier now. "Morning, Kate," Brody said, tipping his hat. "Letter for you. From Leavenworth." Kate took the envelope. He recognized the handwriting immediately. It was jagged, aggressive, but shaky. He didn't open it. He looked at the fire burning in the new hearth, visible through the open window. "Bad news?" Martha asked, walking up the steps, wiping soil from her hands. "Old news," Kate said. He walked into the house and tossed the unopened letter into the fireplace. He watched the paper curl and blacken, the words of Silas Thorne turning into ash and smoke, rising up the chimney and disappearing into the vast, blue Wyoming sky. Kate walked back out to the porch and sat in his rocking chair next to Martha. He took her hand. Her grip was strong, warm, and alive. "You know," Kate said, looking out over the green valley that stretched toward the mountains, "Thorne was right about one thing." "What's that?" Martha asked. "He said we were just scratching at the dirt," Kate said. "He didn't know that the dirt is what holds us up." Martha smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "The storm is over, Kate." "Aye," Kate said, closing his eyes as the warm spring breeze brushed his face. "All stop now." The valley was quiet, save for the song of a meadowlark and the distant, rhythmic sound of a hammer striking wood, not rebuilding a ruin, but building a cradle for the neighbor's new barn down the road. Life went on in Blackwood Creek, stronger than the wind and richer than any stolen silver. And so, the empire of Silas Thorne crumbled, not because of a bank error or a bad investment, but because an old couple refused to let a storm, or a tyrant, take the only thing that really mattered, their home. Kate and Martha Vance proved that the strongest foundations aren't made of silver bars hidden in the dark. They're made of courage, standing in the light. It makes you wonder, how many secrets are still buried in the backyards of the American West, waiting for a storm to reveal them? If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, do me a favor. Hit that like button. It helps us share these forgotten legends with more people. And if you want more real-life dramas, twists and tales from the Wild West, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. I'll see you in the next story.